They told us the British Empire was built on the thunder of naval guns, the spread of the Union Jack across continents, and the disciplined march of redcoat regiments. They spoke of geography and industry, of coal and steel. But this narrative misses the true, almost secret weapon, the quiet, ceaseless engine of credit and debt, conceived not by admirals or generals, but by a select council of bankers and financiers in the City of London. The global dominance of Great Britain was not a military phenomenon. It was a financial masterwork, a system that flawlessly transmuted the abstract concept of debt into tangible, decisive military and commercial power. This sophisticated mechanism, first ignited centuries ago, is the blueprint that continues to run the global economy today. To truly understand the world's modern financial architecture, the sovereign debt markets, the interbank lending, the very nature of government finance, one must look back to 1694, the year the machinery of the British Empire was first officially assembled. In the late 17th century, England was not a preeminent global power. It was a secondary state, perpetually short of ready cash, financially fragile, and overshadowed by the true heavyweight champions of the era, the Dutch Republic, with its advanced capital markets, and the French monarchy, with its centralized wealth and massive population. English monarchs were notoriously unreliable borrowers. Their promises were cheap, and their penchant for defaulting on loans meant their credit rating was abysmal. To borrow money was expensive, slow, and often unsuccessful. Without secure, reliable funding, England could not finance a modern navy capable of challenging its rivals, nor could it sustain the protracted European wars that defined the era. The state was armed with muskets and ships, but its purse was a sieve. This desperation led to a political and financial revolution, the creation of the Bank of England in 1694. This was not merely a state bank, it was an ingenious financial innovation. A consortium of private lenders agreed to extend a substantial loan to the Crown, enough to immediately finance a crucial war against France, but on the condition that they would be chartered as a permanent independent corporation, the Bank of England, with the sole right to issue notes and manage the government's debt. This deal was nothing less than the outsourcing of the state's financial integrity to the merchant class. The shaky promise of a mortal king was replaced by the stable, institutionalized guarantee of the nation itself, backed by the future revenue from customs duties and excise taxes. This was the birth of the permanent national debt. This institutionalized debt was the empire's alchemy of credit. The government's obligation was transformed into a liquid, tradable asset, the government bond. For the first time, investors knew that lending to the English state was safe, because the Bank of England stood as the guarantor and the engine for repayment. This meant Britain could borrow cheaply and limitlessly, while rivals like France and Spain relied on exhausting their immediate cash reserves or engaging in highly disruptive, short-term, high-interest borrowing that often led to collapse. Britain could tap an ever-deepening, highly liquid pool of low-cost capital. The true impact of this financial supremacy was first seen in the European battlefields, transforming warfare into an economic marathon. The new system armed Britain with the ability to fight the last hour of the war, long after its cash-based rivals were forced to surrender due to financial exhaustion. The War of the Spanish Succession in the early 18th century serves as a textbook example. Britain, though smaller in population, sustained its armies and fleets for over a decade, effortlessly rolling over its debts. France, despite its vast internal wealth, repeatedly defaulted on its loans, crippling investor confidence and pushing its borrowing costs to prohibitive levels. The conflict was not settled by a decisive military superiority alone, but by a superior balance sheet. The British state could always afford another year of fighting, another new ship, another subsidy to an ally. The Bank of England was the shield that never buckled, allowing the navy to be the sword that struck when rivals were financially vulnerable. The system only matured through subsequent conflicts, culminating in the titanic struggle of the Napoleonic Wars. Here, the contest was explicitly a war between two financial philosophies. Napoleon, cut off from global commerce by the British Navy and distrustful of bankers, relied on the outdated method of plunder and tribute, forcing conquered territories to fund his campaigns. His financial system was brittle and dependent on continuous military success. Britain, by contrast, leveraged its financial mechanism to the fullest, borrowing an astronomical sum, hundreds of millions of pounds, on the London bond market. Investors, confident that Britain's global trade would eventually generate the tax revenue needed for repayment, kept lending. The financial power was so immense that at one point, over half of the government's annual expenditure went solely to pay the interest on the debt. Yet, the nation survived. Britain outlasted the seemingly unstoppable Napoleon, not in a single brilliant military maneuver, but through the sheer financial endurance provided by its credit system. But the engine of empire was driven by more than just debt for war. Its second, equally crucial cylinder was trade, seamlessly integrated with the military financial machine. This integration was best embodied by the infamous East India Company, EIC, a joint stock company that was effectively the empire's corporate, military, and administrative vanguard. The EIC was the world's first true corporate sovereign. Investors in London bought EIC shares, hoping for rich dividends from spices and textiles, but those profits were not derived from fair commerce. They were extracted through conquest. The EIC raised its own massive private armies, fought wars against local rulers, and established vast colonial tax collection regimes across the Indian subcontinent. The financial model was a self-perpetuating feedback loop. The Bank of England provided cheap credit, which funded the ships and soldiers. The ships and soldiers facilitated the conquests of the EIC. The EIC's captured territories generated massive tax revenues and trade monopolies, and these revenues, funneled back to London through corporate dividends and customs duties, guaranteed the safety of the government bonds. This stability, in turn, allowed the government to borrow even more cheaply for the next war or the next phase of expansion. Credit became commerce, commerce became conquest, and conquest reinforced credit. The bondholders and bankers in London were the real recipients of this cycle, growing immensely wealthy from the interest payments, while the actual cost, the burden of taxation, and the devastating impact of resource extraction was externalized onto the peripheral peoples of the colonized territories. The mid-19th century marked the high watermark of Britain's financial power, centered on the uncontested dominance of sterling. The City of London solidified its position as the financial nerve center of the globe, surpassing its former Dutch and French rivals entirely. The vast majority of international trade, whether between New York and Shanghai or Buenos Aires and Sydney, was denominated, cleared, and insured in sterling, making the currency the world's undisputed medium of exchange. This financial omnipresence was formalized and amplified by the global gold standard. The gold standard, to the uninitiated, sounds like a simple, logical pegging of the currency to a commodity. In practice, for Britain, it was a profound instrument of financial governance. By tying the pound sterling to a fixed amount of gold, Britain projected an image of absolute, unshakable stability and trustworthiness. This credibility was magnetic. Investors from all over the world flocked to hold British assets, knowing that they could always convert their holdings into the ultimate store of value, gold. This allowed Britain to borrow even more cheaply than ever before and to deploy capital across the globe, funding everything from Argentine railways to South African mines. Crucially, the gold standard served as an economic and monetary operating system for the entire empire. Countries that wished to participate fully in the lucrative global trade system had to adopt London's monetary discipline, effectively aligning their national economic policies with the expectations and needs of British financiers. This financial mechanism also introduced a new, brutal form of financial warfare. Take, for instance, the infamous Opium Wars with China. On the surface, the conflict was ostensibly about trade and tariffs. The deeper truth was financial. Britain had a massive trade deficit with China, which demanded payment for its tea, silk and porcelain in silver, leading to a severe drain on British reserves. To fix this catastrophic balance of payments problem, British merchants, backed by London finance, aggressively sold opium, grown on EIC-controlled lands in India, into China, creating a devastating cycle of addiction and a massive reverse flow of silver back to London. When the Chinese government attempted to stop this predatory trade to protect its people, the British government dispatched its technologically superior navy. The resulting military victory and the forced opening of Chinese ports were not just a commercial triumph, they were a financial necessity, ensuring the solvency of the London-centric trading system. The Opium Wars demonstrated that when the balance sheet of the City of London was threatened, the might of the Royal Navy would be deployed to correct the economic ledger. The empire was ruled by loan agreement and naval artillery in equal measure. The legacy of this system is not a faded historical curiosity. It is the unseen engine that powers the modern world. The concepts forged in the late 17th century, the perpetual national debt, the primacy of the bond market, the use of a dominant currency to enforce global policy, are all still in use. When today's governments borrow trillions, when central banks engage in quantitative easing to maintain liquidity, when the International Monetary Fund imposes strict conditions on a struggling nation in exchange for a bailout, you are observing the direct technological descendants of the Bank of England's original mechanism. The actors have changed. Wall Street and Frankfurt replaced the City of London as the primary hubs, and the US dollar replaced the pound sterling, but the playbook is the same. The enduring uncomfortable truth is that modern prosperity, like imperial glory, is disproportionately driven by who controls the financial architecture, not who controls the resources. Britain's bankers perfected the art of transmuting national risk into private profit and externalizing the cost of empire onto the periphery. Their system was efficient for investors and devastating for the vulnerable, ensuring that wealth flowed from the edges of the empire back toward the center. Therefore, the critical lesson for today is not a historical observation, but a call to vigilance. You cannot navigate a world built on this financial blueprint if you do not understand the blueprint itself. When the headlines scream of global debt crises, soaring inflation, or the inevitable bursting of asset bubbles, recognize that these events are not random acts of financial nature. They are often the predictable consequences of a system designed to maximize momentum and channel capital toward those who manage the debt. The ultimate power resides not with those who hold the gold, or even those who issue the paper, but with those who control the rules of credit and the flow of capital. They are the true architects of power, the ones who decide which nations survive the financial marathon and which collapse from economic exhaustion. Financial knowledge is no longer an optional skill. It is the essential shield that prevents one from becoming the unsuspecting, perpetual taxpayer for a new, digitally driven global empire. Understand the system, or it will continue to exploit you, just as it built the British Empire centuries ago.